Tordrad drew his great axe, raising it in defiance of the taint before him, pointing the weapon at the Khornite champion while screaming a battle cry of Tortor! As if in reaction to this, his weapon seemed to crackle with lightning, but for a brief moment. Some part of him that wasn't consumed with battle rage in the face of his most hated of all enemies must have known that this was strange. He knew that this weapon was not magical in nature. The Khorn champion, recognizing the challenge, roared back a terrible curse in his own language that even the other champions wouldn't understand. Both men charged at each other, looking like two stampeding rhinos about to meet somewhere in the middle. They clashed. Tordrad's axe lashed out and was parried aside easily, time and time again. The Kislevite brought his shield around in time, foregoing his axe to block a powerful counterattack. Tordrad then shield bashed the champion to push off his second counterattack, but the impact did nothing to stop the hulking brute this time. It flurried a series of attacks back at Tordrad, which quickly overwhelmed the man, so that all he could do was raise a shield and concentrate on blocking each impact of solid, sharp bone as it tested Kislevite workmanship to the limit. Then a massive foot came up and kicked Tordrad's shield center on, with a strength that notched it from the creature's toenails that also grew unstably out of its armor-clad boots. Even though the shield absorbed the blow, the sheer strength of it pushed the man backwards. He found himself skidding along the ground and almost off of his feet. He kept his balance with the stagger, shaken up at this, the most powerful foe he had ever faced. If his shield hadn't been there, in all probability, that blow would have shattered his entire ribcage, he knew. He would die in this battle, he knew that too, but faced the champion, looking him in the eye with the dignity of a warrior born. Before he could charge again, this time to his death, he saw that Tobias was quickly standing to his feet once more. He had armed a slingshot with the largest stone in his collection and fired it at Soulflayer. It hit her in the side of the face, breaking her concentration for a moment. Her eyes desperately wanted to turn angrily towards the halfling for daring to mark her sensuous skin. But she could not afford to do it. She had to keep channeling the spell. She screamed something in a high-pitched wail, and the Nurgle champion Blackrot grunted in understanding. He began to walk towards the halfling, his overweight mass and hideous mouth looking every bit like he could swallow Tobias whole. Tordrad saw this and was torn between attacking the Khorn champion or Nurgle's one. Bonesaw made the decision easy because he too began stepping towards the group. Tobias looked on in terror. His little legs were trembling. His slingshot hung feebly by his side, looking about as useful as a child's toy right now. Dieter had begun moving backwards into the room that had contained the warpstone. He wanted no part of this fight. They had found the Chaos Champions that the witch hunters would want to see, and it did not mean that they had to die to prove their innocence, he thought. He waited, though, to see who would die first, at least. Rysandria looked around at the situation about them. She saw her allies in trouble. Her terrified voice pleaded to Maestro, "Do something! Stop them!" Maestro, up until now, had frozen to the spot, confronted with true champions of chaos like this. He had never been witness to the real thing before. They were only stories in a book to him, someone else's problem. But now, he was that someone else. He and the people around him, who he had begun to enjoy the company of. He didn't want to see them die. He didn't want to die either. He'd convinced himself that his pause was simply an attempt at preparing his mind to channel a spell. In truth, though, he knew his petty magic lore would not be enough to stop the threat that lay before them now. He then accepted that it was him standing in these shoes, truly him. He knew that he had to step up and take this seriously. He had never wanted to be a wizard. He had fought his training at every step. Now more than anything, though, he wished he had tried harder and become more powerful. It was too late for that now, he told himself. Far too late. His face became grim, his eyes focused. The purple rings around the grey of his eyes seemed to ignite and swirl. Suddenly the winds of Azir were drawing towards him. His face remained an unchanging mask as confidence took over. He shouted at the champions at the top of his voice. "Wait!" Cha! The nearest two champions stopped where they were and looked at the wizard in surprise. He had spoken their language. He had spoken in the dark tongue. Of the 4 languages he already knew relatively well, that was one of them. Maestro continued. You may be individually the champions of your own demonic gods. This got the attention of all 4 of them, looking at him in doubt that what they were hearing was even true. The wizard continued. But we, men of the Empire, are undivided. The devout of Ch4 looked suddenly worried by this statement. Then, perhaps, as if reading some insight into Maestro's aura or future happenings, shouted, No! Maestro spoke the arcane words of a spell directed towards Charzai, champion of Ch4. His magical safeguards were in place to protect his body from harm were it to come to that, but there was nothing to protect his staff from a drop spell. The champion's crackling gem staff was suddenly torn out of his hands. It fell downwards and impacted against the floor with an echoing clatter that was replaced in a half-second by the shattering sound of glass. The impact had shattered the energy-filled gem on the end of it. There was a huge surge of magical backlash that swept up and swirled into the vortex of the portal itself. A huge silhouette of a winged beast could be seen taking shape inside the great magical opening. But as soon as the exterior energy struck the portal's center point, it exploded, ripping the ring apart in 3 places, sending twisted white-hot metal flying across the room, followed by an explosion that engulfed the entire chamber, including the 4 champions.